Hello my dear friends, I'm Corey. In this video we'll show you how to paint a Space Marine Librarian. A Librarian is a special type of Space Marine that went through and managed to survive a rigorous and hard training and screening so that it can be able to bend the warp to its will. So basically it's a combat psyker for the Space Marines. And since this type of Space Marines are basically magic wielder, we can say that, they are extremely powerful and useful when deployed on the battlefield and, of course, on the tabletop. So I reckon that a lot of you would like to have a Librarian ready to be put on tabletop. So I'm showing you my way to paint one. Librarian, like all the other type of specialist marine, like I like to call them, have a specific type of color for their armor. Well, most of the time, of course, you can paint your Librarian whatever color you want, but generally speaking, if you want your Librarian to be lore friendly, you will have to paint him in a specific color, which is blue, like the Ultramarines. So I guess that you can also use this tutorial if you want to paint a Ultramarines army or other type of blue armor. But before we begin, let me add a very small and very quick disclaimer. When I try to understand what kind of blue tone it would be the correct one for this tutorial, I realize that most of the time it's not the same, even in the Warhammer official website. Sometimes Librarians have a very bright blue tones and sometimes it's a very dark one. So I guess that both of them are valid and I decided to use a bright blue tone, but you can just switch to a more darker one and the tutorial will be basically the same. The steps are the same. It doesn't make any difference what kind of blue you decide to use. So just be aware of that, alright? So let's start. All of the colors that I'm going to use are listed down in the description if you want to check them out. Let's go on the hobby table so that I can show you how I painted my Librarian Space Marine, or Space Marine Librarian. I never remember which goes first. Anyway, let's go. For this tutorial, I'll use the new Librarian in Terminator Armor, but you can paint any Librarian model with this scheme. The first thing to do is to prime the model. I opted for a nice and bright blue primer to speed up the process a little bit, but if you don't have one, you can prime the model in gray or white and then paint the blue armor right after that. After priming the model, I've started dry brushing with a bright sky blue color using a makeup brush. This way I'm raising and accentuating the details of the model, especially the armor, to give it a more three-dimensional appearance. Next up, I've started to paint the pipes and the joint of the armor. I generally start to base coat a model by painting the inner part of it. The joints of a Space Marine armor are almost always black, but the pipes in a Librarian model are bright red and yellow, which adds more contrast to the model. I've also painted the storm bolter of the Librarian in black. I've also painted the skin of the model. I decided to give my Librarian a dark skin tone, but you can paint the skin of your model however you like, of course. I've heard that a lot of hobbyists do everything in their power to always put helmets on their models, so to avoid painting skins and to give them a more realistic, quote-unquote, look, but to be honest, I don't really mind to show the faces of my minis. Now let's paint the leather part of the model. I decided to paint a pouch on the back part of the Librarian waist, the power axe handle, and the necklace that the Librarian is holding with his left hand. A Space Marine worthy of its name need to have at least 2 to 4 skulls and purity seals scattered around his armor. Both the purity seals paper and some skulls have been painted in a light beige color. If you don't like to paint bones and skull with beige, you can just paint them with gold and it would also have a great look. I've also painted the purity seals wax. Generally I use a magenta color for them, but also red or green works very well. And speaking of red, I decided that this was the right time to paint the right shoulder pad of the Marine with this color to represent my Space Marine chapter symbol. Every Space Marine chapter has its own symbols, icons, and specific color of their shoulder pads. Ultramarines ones are blue, Salamander pads are black, Imperial Fist are yellow, and so on. So paint it with the color of your chosen chapter. Now it's time to paint the metallic. Nothing too fancy here, you'll just have to decide the amount of gold and steel that you want to paint on your model. Generally, I tend to use a steel-like color and silver predominantly on the metallic part of the model. In this case the axe, the vents on the back, and the stormbolter, while gold is instead applied on a smaller part like some skulls and holy trinkets. To add more realism to the model, the edge highlight technique is the most useful one in my opinion. Do you remember at the beginning when I've dry brushed the entire model? We are going to do basically the same thing here, but more carefully by using a small brush. Paint some thin line on the edges of the model using the color that we use to base coat it, mixed with a tiny amount of white or ivory paint. If you don't know exactly which edges to highlight, just concentrate on the most external ones on the top and on the side of the miniature. Do these to the entire model except for the metallic part and the face. You'll understand why in a moment. Oh, and don't forget to write something on the purity seals. No, don't worry, I'm joking. You don't have to actually write tiny phrases and microscopic symbols on them. Just paint some squiggly lines on them with a dark brown paint and nobody will notice, I promise. Alright, it's time to wash the model. Not in the literally sense, of course, but by using a special type of paint called washes. These are extremely thin and watery paints that are used to dark the tones of the colors down and, by doing so, amplifying the shadows in the recesses of our miniatures. The best way to do so, in my opinion, is to mix the wash with some water in a ratio of 50% water to a 50% wash. Then apply it on the model, being careful not to use too much of it. You could just use a brown wash, but I like to use the washes matching the color of the part that I'm painting, like a blue wash on the blue parts, a red wash on the red parts, a sepia wash on the gold and skin tone, and a black wash on the steels and silver parts. Once the washes have dried, I wanted to try a glowing effect like the one shown on the box of the model. This is optional, of course, you can skip this part if you want. What I did was to thin down some white paint and paint the runes on the armor with it. And then I did the same thing with some turquoise paint to make it look like magic is glowing underneath the armor. Ooh. The last touch to be added to the model are the layering of the metallic and the face highlights. Let's start with this one. Basically, I'm doing the same edge highlighting technique that I did before, but after washing down the face of the model, the contrast with bright tones and light tones will enhance the realism of the skin, making our model look more real. I'm also doing the same on the skulls and bones of the model. For our last touch, we need to layer the metallic. This means that we are going to paint with the base color that we used before to paint the steel and gold parts by thinning them down a little bit more to make them more transparent. This way, the metallic parts will look shinier and brighter. Or you can just leave them as they are to give them a more grimy and dirty look. It's up to you. The very last thing that we have to do is to apply the decals on our model with the symbols and icon of our choice, and to paint the base. The only way to paint the base of a model wrong is not to paint the base of a model at all. I like to use a brown texture paint, then wash it, dry brush it, and in the end, gluing some static grass on it. But of course you can choose the way to base your miniatures that you prefer. Just be sure to use the same method for your entire army, so that they all look nice together. And here we have our Space Marine Librarian, ready to be deployed on the battlefield alongside your Space Marine army. Alright my friends, thank you very much. I hope this tutorial was helpful to you. I actually had a lot of fun, and it's this was actually the very first Terminator Space Marine Terminator Armor that I have ever painted, which doesn't make any difference. It's just that the armor is a little bit bigger. But you know, there's always a first time, and it was fun. And I hope that you will have fun too. And I also hope, especially, that this tutorial will be extremely helpful. Let me know down in the comments what you think about it, and also leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more videos in the future. And down in the description there are going to be a couple of links, one for my Instagram and the other for my Patreon. If you want to support me, you don't have to support me. Of course, you don't have to spend money to support me, but if you want, just help me a little bit, I will be extremely grateful. Just, it's up to you. Alright, this is the end of the video. I'm Corey, and I hope to see you the next time. Ciao, ciao.